be postponed. It's now in order to consider amendment number 42, printed in House Report 113-170. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 42, printed in House Report number 113-170, offered by Mr. Cole of Oklahoma.
Pursuant to House Resolution 312, the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole, and a member each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized.
I'm offering a bipartisan amendment this evening, Mr. Chairman, to prevent funds from the so-called Working Capital Fund from being used to implement furloughs of DoD employees. This amendment would affect approximately 180,000 workers scattered around the country in different Working Capital Fund units. Tinker, Hill, Robbins, the Great Air Logistics Centers account for 26,000 of those. Working Capital Fund employees are indirectly funded by the government and not by direct appropriations. The commands where these employees are paid have more than sufficient funds to continue to operate without a furlough. Indeed, furloughing these workers would be counterproductive and ultimately cost money. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose?
I rise to claim time in opposition to the gentleman's amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I appreciate the gentleman's concern and the fact that he is focused on working capital that is essentially funded through customer reimbursement. But as I mentioned in an earlier debate, am opposed to the gentleman's amendment. I voted against the Budget Control Act. I think sequestration is an abhorrent way to run the government. I was disappointed last year when we made every federal agency in this nation, including the Department of Defense, wait 7 months until we told them how much money we're going to give them. And then almost most of the agencies, we then told them, well, we're just going to give you what we gave you last year. Now we're suffering because of furloughs. And the concern I have here, again, is making distinctions between one federal employee and another. They're all very important. I don't know what going to work every day as a guard in a maximum security federal prison must be like. But I don't know that we've carved out an exception for them. I don't know what it is like to be a federal law enforcement official working undercover, putting your life at risk, getting reimbursed, but not being carved out for a furlough. We have people at NIH, National Institutes of Health, doing groundbreaking research as far as people's health and safety, and perhaps they not themselves are risking their lives. But tomorrow, if they were at work, could make a discovery that could improve or prolong someone's life. And I think it's a very difficult proposition to begin to make those distinctions between various federal employees. I absolutely share the gentleman's concern as to what is happening with the federal workforce. I have mentioned in committee and on this floor more than once today that I'm appalled that for 4 years we hold federal employees in so little regard. We have not given any of them a raise in 4 years, but we scurried to the floor because people were going to be inconvenienced on the House floor, not the House floor, at airports because of potential slowdowns at the FAA. Well, federal employees actually do things for our safety, like make sure when we leave the ground in an airplane, we're safe. So again, I'm very concerned here. The fact is, allowing exceptions for one agency, I do think is unfair to others. Allowing exceptions that pit one agency against another wrongly determines the value of the work performed by some government employees vis-a-vis others. We ought to value all of their work collectively together and should not be looking for temporary fixes of one dislocation, as great as it is, caused by sequestration. What we ought to be about, and I know the gentleman is about that, is to end this madness, if you would, and get back to the business of governing this country. I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to extend 1 minute's worth of time to my good friend from the state of Washington, new member from the 6th District.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of this amendment, and let me take a second here to say I oppose sequestration, I oppose the furloughs, and I believe Congress should be moving forward on a plan to eliminate sequestration and the process of furloughing workers. But Congress hasn't done that, and now we're forced to deal with an ugly process where we're cutting accounts and furloughing workers, not because it makes any sense for the public interest or for our national security, but because Congress can't get its act together. This amendment responds to what I believe was an incorrect decision by the Department of Defense to furlough civilian workers who work at entities that were funded through defense working capital accounts. The working capital funds are revolving funds that provide goods and services across the DoD that were established to promote stable pricing and reliable access. They were designed to be self-sustaining, and I certainly empathize with the other workers and groups that are facing furloughs, but these workers are not funded through direct appropriation. I believe that these indirectly funded employees are specifically exempted by law from sequestration. Furthermore, I believe that furloughing these employees and thereby delaying their work will not save any money, will only increase costs for DoD and hurt taxpayers and jeopardize our military readiness. And I thank the good gentleman.
Has expired. Gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
I would reserve my time.
Gentleman from Reserves, the gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield 1 minute to the distinguished Majority Whip from the great state of California.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Well, I thank the gentleman, and Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of this amendment. This issue is straightforward. It deals with defense working capital funds. Now, this is just like owning a business. When you provide a service or a product, you get paid for it. That is how defense working capital funds operate. They are paid through reimbursements for the services they provide to the Department of Defense, which is already funded for the fiscal year. Thus, working capital funds do not receive direct appropriations, and therefore furloughing these individuals have no savings. They actually have the direct opposite effect. It'll cost you more, there'll be delays, and most importantly, individuals will be harmed in the process. The specialized work that Defense Working Capital Fund employees perform is vital to our nation's security and our war fighters around the globe. A blanket 11-day furlough policy, such as China Lake in my district, will only end up slowing down our war fighters, the best and latest technology to complete their mission when called upon to perfect and defend America and safely return home to their families. This is very simple. They do not effect inside a furlough. They are a business that performs work and they get paid for it, and the money is already there. That's why I ask and urge all of us to join in supporting this amendment.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
I would reserve my time.
Gentleman Reserves, gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Utah, my colleague on the Rules Committee and my classmate, Mr. Bishop.
Gentleman from Utah is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As stated, this workload is a self-sustaining process, which means if the workload is there, and it is, then the money is there, and it is. To furlough the employees in this area saves no money, it completes no work, but it does raise the cost of overhead for all of the depots. Look, I have empathy for the Pentagon. They made a decision that everyone should share the pain in an effort to be fair. Unfortunately, Section 10, or Title 10, Section 2472, tells us how this fund should be managed. Sharing the pain ain't one of the options. I appreciate what is going on here, but the Defense Department cannot simply pick and choose. This amendment does not start a new program. It simply requires that the existing law be followed. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
I would reserve my time.
Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to yield 1 minute to my good friend from the great state of Iowa, Mr. Loebsack.
Gentleman from Iowa is recognized for 1 minute.
All right. I want to thank my friend from Oklahoma for yielding 1 minute. I am a proud co-sponsor of this truly bipartisan amendment, as demonstrated by those who are speaking in favor of it tonight. I, too, voted against sequestration, and I oppose furloughing any DoD citizens who work on behalf of our national security and our troops. Those working at the Rock Island Arsenal, which I represent, proudly serve our country. They don't deserve a pay cut because of Washington's dysfunction. It's as simple as that. That's why Congress and the administration must find a balanced, common-sense way to replace sequestration. This amendment addresses the unique situation of the Working Capital Fund civilians, like those at the Joint Manufacturing and Technology Center, who are already funded from prior years. I think that's important to keep in mind. Furloughing these men and women doesn't create direct savings, as has already been mentioned. Rather, it delays work for our troops, it hurts our readiness, and it increases costs for taxpayers without direct savings. Again, I oppose all furloughs, and I do oppose sequestration. This amendment, I believe, is a common-sense policy for DoD and for Working Capital Fund employees, and I urge my colleagues to support it. Again, it's a fully bipartisan amendment.
Time
Thank
of the
you.
gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized with 15 seconds remaining for the gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield the balance of my time to my good friend from the great state of Georgia, Mr. Scott.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 15 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a sensible bipartisan solution. It helps the country by helping those who work at our depots and other areas. And I would just ask that my colleagues join this bipartisan coalition that's working in support of this amendment. With that, I yield the remainder of the time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
Time back.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Oklahoma. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The chair understands that amendment number 43 will